Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Yet podcast. My name is TC Burr, and I am excited to bring you this episode today. A little bit of a different episode this time. It's going to be a solo episode with me. I want to talk today about the enemies of progress. These are 4 things that I think will absolutely submarine any progress that you want to make with your book, your business, your goal, anything that you are trying to pursue in terms of a big goal. These are the enemies of progress. I think if we recognize them and we find tools to combat them, we will be so much more successful with what it is we are trying to accomplish. Before we get into today's episode, though, I want to encourage you to check out my website. It's tcburr.com. I've just published this website recently, and I've started a blog there, so I'd love for you to go check that out. You can also find all the podcast archives, as well as some other content, including a sample of the book that I'm writing. So I hope you'll check it out. It's tcburr.com. Go and check that out today. All right, let's get to today's show. So today we're talking about the enemies of progress. All of us, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming you have a goal that you're trying to pursue. Many of the people that I've talked to are business owners, or they want to be business owners. Lots of them are writing books. Some of them are launching podcasts. But whatever it is, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a big goal that you want to go after. Or maybe you've got multiple goals that you want to go after. And like all goals, we want to see progress in these goals, right? That's the whole point. When you start moving toward a goal, you want to see progress. You want to see that you're trending in the right direction. You want to see that you are becoming the person you've set out to be, or you're achieving the thing that you've set out to do. But there are some big enemies that stand in the way of progress. And so I want to jump right in and talk about, from my perspective, what I think the biggest enemies of progress are. Number 1, fear of failure. I think this is an enemy that all of us have done battle with. Anybody who's ever tried to set out to do something big has dealt with the fear of failure. Now, if you're working on an easy goal, something that you know is within the scope of what you can do, maybe you don't have any problems with this. Or maybe you're just a naturally brave person and fear of failure is not a thing for you. If that's you, okay, just hang in for a minute. I'll get to number 2 in a second. But for the rest of us, this is a major enemy. Why is it that we struggle so much with the fear of failure? Well, I think because our dream, our goal, our idea, the thing that we want to do means so much to us. We've been thinking about it, some of us, for years, and we've had these ideas that we've kicked around and we've revised and we've planned and we've thought for a long time. And so we have this thought that creeps into the back of our mind. Even though we want to pursue it and we want to make progress, we have this thought that creeps into the back of our mind. What if it completely tanks? What if I spend a year writing this book and nobody reads it? What if it doesn't make any sense? What if I start this business or I launch this product and no one buys it? What then? We ask ourselves these hypothetical questions like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And sometimes we ask that as a comfort, right? Like we tell ourselves like, hey, even if the worst thing happens, you're still no worse off. And I think that can be true and helpful. But I was at an event once and there was a guest speaker, and the guest speaker said, instead of asking what's the worst that can happen, what if you reframed it and asked yourself what is the best that could happen? And I love that perspective because when you think about things in those terms, all of a sudden your dream starts to take shape. It starts to get tangible in your mind, and it starts to become a pretty amazing reality that you want to pursue. But the fear of failure is absolutely one of the top 4 enemies of progress. In my spare time, I like to lift weights. That's what I do for exercise. I go to the gym and I lift weights. And in weightlifting, lots of times people lift to failure. They lift weight that's heavier and heavier and heavier until they can't lift anymore. Or you perform a number of reps until you're just so exhausted that you cannot push the weight up one more time. You fail on purpose. In weightlifting, failure is a part of the process, and it actually makes you stronger. It makes you better at the thing that you're trying to do. Now, I don't know the science behind that. If you're a weightlifter, you can feel free to debate me on this, but I love the mentality of it. I love the idea that failure is built into the process and it makes you stronger. It makes you better. Even if you go through the process of writing your book, doing your thing, and it's not what you thought it was going to be, now you're a better writer. Now you've gone through the process. You've gotten more reps in. You've improved your craft. You've learned lessons along the way. So there's nothing really to be afraid of in terms of failure. So what if you fail? So what if it doesn't take off the way that you thought it would? Now you've got a valuable lesson, you've gained valuable experience, and you've got that much more work under your belt to launch out into your next dream. So, enemy of progress, number one, fear of failure. Number two, the number two enemy that I think many of us struggle with when it comes to pursuing our goals is imposter syndrome. You ever dealt with this one? This is the idea that you're not good enough, that you don't have what it takes. And it's really closely connected to the fear of failure, but it's a little different. There's a nuance in that you look around at the world around you. You look at maybe your peers who are doing the same thing that you are, and you see yourself as so much more inferior to the rest of them. You think, I could never do what he or she is doing. I could never have the kind of progress or the kind of social media presence, or I could never write the types of books that so-and-so writes. But the more you talk to really, really successful people, the more you realize everybody deals with this at some level. Now, maybe not when they're decades into their career, but especially when folks are starting out, this is such a common enemy of progress. The idea that you are not good enough, that you don't have what it takes, that your idea could never take off is so common, and it kills so many dreams, so many ideas. So let me be the first to tell you that your dream, your idea, your goal is worth pursuing. Don't be afraid to fail, because if you fail, you'll gain valuable lessons. Don't think that you're not good enough. You are the only person who's qualified to pursue your specific dream. So you should go for it. The world needs what you have to offer. The third enemy of progress when it comes to our goals, and this is such a big one, is a lack of encouragement. I think so many people, the reason why so many of us struggle with the first two is because we're dealing with the third. We fear failure and we feel imposter syndrome because we don't have people lifting us up, encouraging us, fanning our flame, and pushing us forward. Hey listeners, so I'm doing it. I'm writing my book. It has been an amazing journey. It's been so much harder than I thought it would be, but also so much more rewarding. I cannot wait to share this story with you. I don't know when that's going to be. I've still got a lot to do before this is ready to be finalized and edited and printed, and it may be years before it's done, but I cannot wait to hold the finished copy in my hand and to share it with you. I want to continue to encourage other writers. And so one of the ways that I want to do that is bringing more writers on the show. So if you are a writer or you know a writer, let's get in touch. I would love to share your story about how you're writing, what you're writing, and why you're writing. This is much less about the finished product and much more about the process, the inspiration, and the mindset. So again, if you are a writer or you know a writer, get in touch with me. Let me know. You can contact me on my website. It's tcburr.com. There you'll find a form to contact me. I would love to get in touch and maybe even inspire and encourage someone with your story. Thanks. Back to the show. I remember years ago, I was hanging out with some friends watching a basketball game, and One of the guys there was a published author, super smart guy I've got a ton of respect for. And just in the course of the conversation, I mentioned, yeah, I'm thinking of writing a book. And when I said that, it was like the air got sucked out of the room. Like I was just like, I got so nervous. Like, what's he going to say? And I was expecting that perhaps he would come back and say, well, yeah, man, I know, but like writing a book is super hard, dude. It's going to take a ton of time. And like, do you really it's super hard. I don't know if you can do it. But that's not what he said to me. This guy who had already published books, who I had a ton of respect for, one of the smartest people I've ever met, looked me in the face, and without missing a beat, he said, you should write that book. I didn't even tell him what it's about. He just automatically said, yeah, you should write it. And so I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. I was not expecting that response, but I doubled down and followed up and said, well, yeah, but I mean, like, the book's probably already been written. Like, it's not, it's not like an original idea, and he's like, no. You are the only one with your experience. You are the only one with your perspective. You are the only one with your gifting and your vision. He said to me, you are the only person who can write your book. And man, in that moment, I was just blown away, and I was so encouraged. Now, I didn't even start writing my book until years later, but I will never forget that exchange because it breathed life into my goal. And maybe at that point in my life, my goal was just hanging on by a thread. Like maybe it was on its dying breath. And this guy with just a kind word breathed new life into it. So maybe that's you. Maybe you have the idea. Maybe you've got the motivation, but for whatever reason, you don't have the right encouragement. Who can you connect with who can keep encouraging you, who can remind you that your idea is worth pursuing? I'm glad you're listening to this podcast. That is one of the main goals that I want to do, is to provide encouragement for other people who are just getting started, because I know how hard it is. I know how difficult it can be to deal with fear of failure, to deal with imposter syndrome, and to deal with a lack of encouragement. So I think that you and I can provide that encouragement for one another. I've been so blown away by all the people I've interviewed for the podcast, business owners, writers, podcasters, like people who are doing cool, creative, fun things. And almost all of them said, I wasn't sure when I got started. Yes, I've dealt with imposter syndrome. Yes, I feared failure. Yes, I have failed in many ways. But it's this community of people that are continually pointing people forward, cheering one another on, that I think in our weakest moments can help keep us going. So, who do you have in your life who can encourage you? And maybe more importantly, how can you encourage someone else? I am a firm believer that encouragement begets encouragement. So the more encouraged I feel, the more likely I am to encourage other people. But I also think it's true that the more I'm thinking about and actively encouraging others, the more I'm going to be encouraged myself. So don't just look to receive, but look to give encouragement too, because you never know what your kind word might mean to someone else. It could literally be the catalyst that move someone toward the book or the business or the invention that changes the world for someone else. So give the encouragement and surround yourself with people who can encourage you. The fourth enemy of progress, and again, this is just my perspective, the fourth thing that keeps us from progressing on our goals is a perceived lack of time. Now, I say perceived because the reality is each of us has the same amount of time in every day. We prioritize how we use that time. Now, I know, when I say that, lots of people are going to come back and immediately say, hey, wait a minute. No, I've got a job. I've got a family. I have a wife. I have a bunch of kids. Thank you very much. I don't have time. I hear you. So I've been reading a lot of Laura Vanderkam lately. She talks a lot about time management, and she, in her book 168 Hours, she talks about how each of us has 168 hours in a week. And if you work 40 hours and sleep 8 hours a night, you do the math, you still end up with, I think it's like 72 hours left where you're not sleeping and you're not working. Now that time gets filled up really quickly with responsibilities, chores, activities. Totally get it. But you do have time to work on your goal. And I would tell you that you don't have time not to work on it. If it's something that's important to you, if it's a passion that you have, it's a dream that you want to pursue, you've got to do it. You've got to make the time. You've got to find the time. I think we sometimes think we need, so for me, I'm writing a book. And I think, sometimes I have this picture in my mind of what a writing session looks like. And for me, that's like, look, I'm by myself, I'm locked in a room, I've got a fire going and a nice cup of coffee or some other beverage, and it's just me and a pencil and paper, or me and my computer for 3 hours. That's not always realistic. And if you are going to get time like that, you're most likely going to get it early in the morning or late at night. So if that works for your schedule, by all means do it. But there's also lots of hidden time throughout the days. If you look at your standard day, I bet there are plenty of 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute blocks where maybe you're in between meetings at work, or you're commuting in the car, or you're standing in line at the grocery store. Are there small things you can do to move your goals forward during those times? And you're probably not going to be able to sit down and write a whole chapter, for example, if you're writing a book, but maybe you could sketch out some character development in the Notes app on your phone. Or maybe you can talk to yourself. I know that sounds weird, but a lot of people have Bluetooth in their car nowadays, so maybe people will just think you're on the phone. Talk through your story out loud to yourself and verbally process that type of thing. There are things you can do even in those small pieces of time that can move you forward in your goal. It's going to take some budgeting, probably. It's going to take some planning. It might take some coordination. If you're someone who's married or you live with a family, you may need to work with your spouse or your family to figure out, hey, on this night, I'm going to set aside this time to work on my goal. But I would encourage you to do that because, again, if it's something that's important to you, if it's something that you've always been dreaming of doing, even if you're working a 9-to-5, look for opportunities to invest in your goal. So, to recap today's episode, the 4 enemies of progress are these. Number 1, fear of failure. We think we're going to fail, and so we don't make progress on our goals. Number 2, imposter syndrome. We think we're not good enough, our story's not good enough, our idea is not good enough, and so we don't move forward. Number 3, lack of encouragement. We don't have the right people in our corner. We don't have people lifting us up and cheering us on and pushing us forward, and we all desperately need encouragement. So how can you find and be encouragement for others? And number 4, the 4th enemy of progress is a perceived lack of time. A little challenge. We all have the same 24 hours in every day. Where can you find the time to move your goals forward? Hey, so I know what we talked about on today's episode. Those are only 4 of the many enemies of progress that folks have to deal with. But I'm curious, of those 4, which are the ones that resonate most with you? Which of those have you had to deal with when you're pursuing your goals? Or maybe, what are some other enemies of progress that I didn't talk about on this show that you've had to deal with? I would love to hear from you. You can send me a note at connect@tcburr.com. You can also go to my website, tcburr.com, and fill out a contact form, or you can reach out to me on Instagram. It's @yetpodcast. I'd love to hear from you. Hey, if you've got a minute, it would mean so much if you would scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show. Your reviews mean so much to me, and I know they help other people find the show as well. So if you could, just take a second, go do a rating and a review. You can help me combat one of my biggest enemies of progress by offering some encouragement through rating and reviewing the show. I really appreciate it. And lastly, I'm going to ask again, if you are a writer or if you know a writer, please get in touch with me. I want to amplify stories of people who are writing. I want to share their stories and encourage and inspire other writers with them. So if you are a writer or know a writer, get in touch with me. I'd love to hear your story. Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And until next time, keep working on your goals, and I'll see you soon.